the breaking news this morning. Just a short time ago, Israel's defense minister said that Iran's supreme leader, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, cannot be allowed to continue to exist. This after Iran struck a hospital inside Israel. The defense minister said, quote, "A dictator like Khamenei, who's heading a state like Iran, who set himself the goal of destroying the state of Israel, he can no longer continue to exist." With us now, the former Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs, retired Army Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt. General, great to see you. This is the Ayatollah right here. This is the most explicit language we've heard from a senior Israeli official calling really for the ouster, calling for essentially regime change here. What significance do you read into that statement, and how would that change the type of military operation we're seeing?
Well, it's an extraordinarily significant statement. That means that the Israelis are subscribing to the policy of regime change. And how would that change the mission? Well, it would just add on to the mission. That is classic mission creep. And while I appreciate everything that Israel has done up to this point about taking out the nuclear facilities, my question to Israel would be, okay, if there's going to be regime change, are you taking over the day after operations yourself?
Talk to me more about that, because you also say this is something the entire world needs to think about more, the day after management.
Well, I do. It goes back to the Colin Powell comment, the old comment about if you break it, you buy it. We saw that in Iraq. We saw that in Afghanistan. I'm not saying that it should be necessarily completely taken off the table, but there ought to be some considerations and a lot of planning, because it's easy to do the regime change, but putting it back together is much like Humpty Dumpty.
And in the type of conflict this is, and we can see all the strikes that have taken place, and this is, I think, just now a fraction of them, all the strikes that have taken place in Iran. The nature of this operation, Israel's over here. I mean, it's not like there are troops at the border of Iran, Israeli or otherwise, waiting to go in to occupy. So if there were to be regime change, if the regime were to fall here, I'm not even sure I understand what would happen, how there would be an organization to run the country.
No, I agree. And people seem to think about Iran as a homogeneous nation. Well, that's not true. Persians only make up about 65%, I think, is the number of the population. You have Kurdish areas, you have Armenian areas, you have the areas out by Afghanistan. And we could unintentionally, Israel could unintentionally be putting Iran into a civil war. That's an extreme case. But I don't necessarily believe that the right answer is bringing in expatriate Iranians who have been out of the country for the last 40 plus years as the solution. We saw that in Iraq, and the expats didn't make things better.
You did have some experience with that, to be sure. One of the other things that people talked about for years in the run-up to a conflict like this between Israel and Iran, it could spiral into a regional conflict. But what they meant when they were talking about that was the presence of Hezbollah in Lebanon, all of Syria, you know, the allies of Iran, even Hamas in Yemen. But now so many of those Iranian proxies are weakened. So when you talk about a possibility of a regional conflict, does that still exist in the same way?
Well, I put it in a different way of looking at this. October 7th and its aftermaths created this once-in-a-generation opportunity for the Israelis to attack into Iran. The great fear before that was if they attacked into Iran, you would have all of these proxies with hundreds of thousands of missiles, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, raining down missiles along with Iran into Israel. That wouldn't work. That was, in fact, a deterrence to Israel from attacking into Iran. After October 7th, the way that Israel has methodically taken out the missile capabilities of all those countries, then they understood all they had to worry about was Iran's capabilities. They could handle it, and that's why they've attacked.
General Mark Kimmitt, always great to have you on. Thanks so much for being with us this morning.
Joining me now, CNN Global Affairs commentator and former Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary Sabrina Singh, and Dana Stroll, Research Director at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy and the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. Thank you both so much for being here. Dana, I'm going to start with you. We have just heard from Israel's defense minister after an Iranian missile struck an Israeli hospital. He said Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, cannot be allowed to continue to exist. We know that Donald Trump had vetoed a plan that Israel had before all of this to take out the supreme leader. Does this change the calculation as Trump weighs whether to get the U.S. militarily involved in this conflict?
It absolutely should. So first of all, whether or not the Israeli Minister of Defense, Minister Katz, actually speaks for the Israeli government and Prime Minister Netanyahu is something that needs to be rigorously questioned at this moment in time. But this is an expansion of the Israeli objective from taking out and dismantling Iran's nuclear program to regime collapse or regime change. Very different, not what President Trump is talking about when he talks to the American people. And so his National Security Council, to the extent that they're actually running a regular process, should be discussing exactly what the implications are for the United States joining, giving this very big change in the Israeli mission.
Yeah, going from saying this was about taking out Iran's nuclear capabilities to talking about regime change, and it is not the first time. Sabrina, how should the president be going about determining if the U.S. should get involved?
Well, I think what's being presented to the president is a number of different options, most likely by the Central Command commander, who is going to present different options of what U.S. involvement could look like. Ultimately, I think, as you've been discussing, today and throughout the week, this is also a political question for the president. Does he want to draw the United States further into a larger, wide-scale war? Because there's no guarantee that, one, even using one of those powerful bunker busters to destroy that nuclear facility in Fordo, that it would fully be destroyed, but two, Iran will retaliate. And the U.S. has significant interest in the region, including multiple bases throughout the Middle East. And if Iran does strike one of our military bases, there is air defenses there, but they are not at the capacity that Israel has with its Iron Dome. And, in the past, Iran has used its proxy groups like Hezbollah or Shia militias in Syria and Iraq to attack American forces. If Iran retaliates to the United States directly, that really will pull the United States into this war. And ultimately, I'm not sure that's what the president seeks at this time.
Dana, you had brought up the idea of mission creep when talking about regime change. What are some of the potential pitfalls if this turns into a mission about trying to change the regime in Iran?
Well, first of all, the United States has been here before. We've attempted this in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and whatever the military said before, how it articulated its military objectives, and then what the political leadership of the United States thought they were doing, what we found over and over is that we don't actually understand the internal dynamics, the different centers of power within these countries that are so far away from America's borders, and rarely do things go as planned. So we're not really talking about regime change anyway. What Israelis are talking about is regime collapse. And nobody actually knows exactly what would happen on the other side of that, nor do we have any confidence that the current thug mafia government in Tehran wouldn't be replaced by just another set of goons committed to the nuclear program, to exporting terrorism, to all the ways in which Iran is a real destabilizing force. So without any articulation of exactly what the United States seeks and whether or not it could deliver or affect any sort of change that would keep the Middle East more peaceful and stable, better for Israel, better for the United States, we should really be thinking twice about joining a mission if the objective is regime collapse.
Sabrina, what level of military force do you think it would take if the United States did get involved to just effectively knock out Iran's ability to continue with its nuclear program?
Well, you're already seeing some assets move into the region. The Department of Defense announced another carrier strike group moving into the region. And so that's going to really bolster the force posture within the area that Central Command operates in, which is the Middle East. And you're also seeing more fighter squadrons move in to different bases around the country. These are assets that are going to be used to protect our military installations across the Middle East, but of course to also protect Americans. We have to think about the many Americans, not that just live in Israel, but across the Middle East. These are some of the assets that we'll be able to defend and protect the skies. But at the end of the day, Iran being able to retaliate against one of our bases will draw the United States into this war, and that is going to commit more assets to the region. And I think what we have to think about here is we can't take our eye off of what's happening in the Indo-Pacific. And with these different carriers moving into the region, you are stressing the system and you are pulling assets away from what is this administration's priority theater, which is China. So it's just a calculation that the president is going to really have to think through.
Yeah, Sabrina Singh, Dana Stroll, thank you both so much for your analysis this morning.